GM, good morning. Welcome to the Milk Road Show, the daily crypto show where we make crypto insights as accessible as asking, can AI do that for me? I'm your host, Jay Hamilton, and today we are joined by the one and only Dan Tapiero, founder, CEO, CIO, managing partner of 1RT Partners and 10T Fund. They've invested in over 20 crypto companies, deployed over 1.5 billion. They're the only growth stage investor that is exclusively focused on blockchain and crypto. And Dan is also a renowned macro investor with over 25 years of experience investing in various markets, gold, and we'll talk about it all. Today, we're going to get Dan's view on macro. Where are we at in the macro cycle right now? What matters most? We're also going to talk about Dan's thesis about why crypto market cap is going to go to 50 trillion in the next 10 years. That's a 30x from today, everybody. And then stick around to the end because we're going to touch on Dan's predictions for this cycle for BTC, ETH, SOL, and total market cap. Before we jump in and hear from Dan, everybody do me a favor, please subscribe or like this channel wherever you're listening, YouTube, podcast. It really helps us out so much. It makes such a difference for the show. Now let's jump in. Dan, welcome to the Milk Road Show.
Jay, great to be here. I think this is my first time, so we didn't do any preparation. So I just said we're going to commando it. Whatever happens, happens.
Oh, I love it. I love the attitude and the willingness to just do it.
Jump in.
Okay, let's start with your job for the past several decades has been to think about the future of markets and economies, to be on the cutting edge, to see things before the rest of the world does, and to do that while assessing risk and reward, and then make smart decisions with how to deploy capital. Now, right now, we're in a very interesting time, a time that we have never really been in before. Before we talk about crypto and AI, I just want to get your view on the current macro setup. Where are we in your mind in the macro cycle right now?
Well, let's talk first about, the recent change in the U.S. government. I think it's, you can talk about nuances in monetary policy on the Fed side, liquidity, et cetera. But the reality is we've just had, I don't want to call it a shock, a huge positive shock to the system, but it's sort of the most dramatic change on the political side that I can recall, certainly in my lifetime. Forget even talking about crypto. I think almost overnight we've installed a super pro-growth, pro-capitalist, pro-business government that is doing some things that we've never even seen before. I don't want to spend the whole time talking about this, but in my life, I don't even remember anybody talking about cutting the budget deficit. Maybe there was lip service paid, but no one even talked about it. And now they're doing it. And Elon is shutting down, whole chunks of the government. I think it's fantastic. Every day we get a list of other things that are wasteful that the government is doing. Transgender bathrooms in Colombia, a DEI opera in El Salvador. These are the craziest things ever. You can't even believe they're real. The U.S. taxpayer has been paying for this kind of stuff. So rationalization of the U.S. government, I think, is medium-term massively bullish. Capital will start flowing to more productive areas. Productivity explodes. I think unemployment goes up because you're going to fire a lot of state workers and people connected to receiving revenue from the government. But I think, they get retrained. I think the Federal Reserve will have to lower rates to offset some of that fiscal contraction. So I know this is not the consensus view now. I also think that the U.S., by doing this and a bunch of other things, is now light years ahead of the rest of the world. Europe, Brussels, is not going to start cutting back on their bureaucracy. There's just zero chance. And you had Bernard Arnault last week say he's just come back from America. He couldn't feel more bullish. He can't believe the positive spirit of the air. And then he says France needs to rationalize and cut back on its government. bureaucracy. I mean, I I look, if he can make it happen, that's wonderful. But I just don't see France heading down that path. And then you look at Asia, and China is in a miasma. They've got real estate problems, leverage problems. You can't trust your investments there. You make an investment, maybe it's your money, maybe it's not. I think there's going to be massive capital inflow into the US, and that will lead to a strong dollar. That will also force or pressure the Fed to cut interest rates. I see inflation dropping or staying steady here at this 2% or lower level. I understand inflation is going up in, for super high end homes and yachts and all that kind of crap. But the reality is that general inflation, the measures of the CPI, core, PC deflator, all these things the Fed looks at, I don't think are going anywhere. So we have a positive fiscal shock. And I don't mean fiscal spending. It's going to be a contraction. It's going to lead to layoffs. It might lead to a little damper in liquidity. But remember this, the short rate is at 4.5%. Okay. This market is at all-time highs. All right. The gold market is at all-time highs. Bitcoin is at all-time highs. And the 2-year is at 4.5. All right. So I think with a stronger dollar, tighter fiscal policy, we're going to see rates go down to offset. And I think that's going to be massively bullish for stocks and for NASDAQ and for Bitcoin and crypto generally. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's sort of my framework. I know a lot of people are in a dollar bear camp for whatever reason. Scott Bessent, Treasury, has said he wants a weaker dollar. I don't see how that happens given the rationalization that is being executed on the federal government level. And who knows, maybe after Elon's done with the federal government, maybe he starts going to the states. Maybe we got to get into California and New York and start chopping there. Like, who knows what will happen if we get to rationalize those places, right?
Yeah, I think you had a great tweet the other day that I just want to pull up, which I think really captured well your sentiment right now, which is you said, finally, the real revolution arrived last week. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. This is a Lenin quote. This obviously ushered in the evil Soviet nightmare that lasted 60 years. What you're saying is imagine now that we could have a golden American era for so long.
Yeah. I mean, okay, that's a little bit of hyperbole, and it sickens my stomach to quote Lenin. But that quote is attributed to Lenin. It isn't necessarily they don't know for sure. But the point is that he did know something about revolution, and it does feel to me like a quiet, positive revolution. We have younger people in there out with the crony, Schumer, Pelosi, old, boomer. I just the miasma that we've been in, really, Biden. I mean, it's just been terrible. And now all of a sudden, energy. I mean, you've got Elon sleeping in a cot in the Oval Office or wherever he is in the Doge building. He's got, they say those, 6 autist, you read that on Twitter, 6 autist programmers completely reprogramming the government. I mean, you're smiling. Everyone's smiling. Mm-hmm. We've got the smartest, most successful people in the country finally in the government. Scott Bessent, who I've known, for over 25 years, extremely talented guy, one of the top macro thinkers and investors, certainly of his generation. We've got him at Treasury. We've just started a sovereign wealth fund that they say is going to be $5 trillion. I mean, you want a guy like Scott Bessent, managing that, or at least appointing someone to manage that. We've just never had such competence. And so I think that's what guys like me are excited about. Like I was, over the years, as you mentioned, 25 years working for some of the great investors, Julian Robertson and Stan Druckenmiller, Steve Cohen. And I was, forced to be on my game 24/7 for years and years and years. And when you work with that caliber of people, you see other parts of the economy where the caliber of people is not as high. And the government has always been a very obvious place, at least in my lifetime. I mean, at least since Reagan, and again, I think there was some good done under W. People debate that, but so I really think you've got younger people, tech focused. We're going to put the entire government on the blockchain. Voting should be on a blockchain.
Mhm.
We're going to digitize everything out there, transparency. I just, people are energized,
Mhm.
and I haven't seen, I don't know about you, but I've never seen people so energized about government. Um, we got the most successful business person potentially in history who
Yeah.
is on his free time deciding that he's going.
All that free time that Elon has, right?
Well, I mean, he's obviously one of the greatest allocators of time ever. He has teams at all these various companies, and he's got to be one of the great leaders and managers of all time, period. I mean, how do you even do 1/10 of one of those companies?
Mhm.
I don't know. And we have that guy leading the charge. We've got Sachs in there on the crypto side. We have all the people that they're bringing in, all of these smart tech guys. I mean, how could you not be just the most excited that you've ever been? And if you
Mhm.
don't think the
Mhm.
stock market's going to follow that, it's crazy. Of course
Mhm.
it is. My concern would be that we are really going to blow away everybody else by such a degree. We're going to create massive global imbalance. Europe and Asia don't have a chance given this configuration of events, given the people we have. If you just look at our team versus their team, I mean, China's got an old guy Xi who is a communist and is for centralized command. I mean, we're going completely the opposite way, decentralized, right? Open source will always win. So I just, you want to have some concerns. I could be wrong about the dollar. I know a lot of people think it's going to enter a bear phase, but feels to me like if you're a capitalist business person, this is where you want to be, and we could get this insanely super strong dollar. Sort of like in '85. We had the Plaza Accord to weaken the dollar, but that was after it exploded. I'm feeling like that's about to happen, and or like in '99 when we had all that capital rush in because we had the NASDAQ bubble. I don't know. It just feels to me like what could be better? I don't even believe it's real sometimes, right? I don't know how you feel about this, but I wake up and every day, like, oh my goodness, there's all this news. It's hard to keep track of. And then you throw AI on top of it and
Yeah.
it's 10x hypercharge, right?
Yeah. 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 It certainly feels different right now. It feels there's an optimism, there is a sense of energy that we have not had in a long time. And I think people are missing I mean, what really stood out to me was at Trump's inauguration. I've said it before on the show. I don't think people realize how big of a deal it was that he was surrounded by all these tech billionaires and not surrounded by his governors. And so that is a huge shift that we've never seen before. And every single person, especially the younger generation, is well aware of the fat that the government has. And we all complain about it. And we all know this. I didn't grow up dreaming about wanting to be in government. I grew up dreaming to want to be in business. That's what I wanted to be. And whereas I think if we go back to previous generations, being in government and being in politics was an admirable thing, was an exciting and an ambitious thing. And so I think there's a shift happening right now that you can't underscore. I don't have the macro insight to break down the dollar, and I think I'm certainly there is a lot of people calling for a lower dollar. A lot of people calling for a
I know.
lower
I think
dollar.
I'm the
So
only guy right now.
you
I
feel like the only one that's not.
yeah, and I've been a dollar bear before, but I changed my view when I saw that what they were going to do on the fiscal side was real. And again, people who have doubters and say, oh, they'll never be able to get it through Congress, they'll never this, they'll never that. I mean, day one, Trump signs 200 different things. We got our sovereign wealth fund. They're just pushing ahead to do what's best for the country. And the only people really complaining are these extreme left-wing guys who got left out in the cold, the Kamala and the Schumer and the fear of, I don't know what. Like, if you're an investor, do you put your money with Elon or do you put your money with Schumer? I mean, it's like a preposterous question, really. And I think that, their voice it's time for them. It's finished. And
Yeah.
you know what? The Democratic Party will reform. It'll figure out, find its way. This is a democratic system, and their ideology is bankrupt. And the younger people of that party will figure that out. They'll adjust. They'll pivot. I mean, I love that picture from that they put up on Twitter X. That was, who was it? It was Trump, Kennedy, Elon, and then someone else. And it said 20 years ago, they were all
Democrats.
Right. I mean, that's hysterical. I mean, that's not the case with me, but I thought that was hysterical. The Republican Party reinvented itself to be in line with what the zeitgeist of the country was. The Democrats are going to have to do the same thing. And so it's just a natural process. I think that's what's great about our system. You got winners, you got losers, and then you have to adjust. Mm-hmm. As long as you adjust, you'll be fine in the end, mm-hmm. right?
Well, and that's always been America's greatest skill, is the fastest at adjusting, the fastest at changing course. You mentioned Asia and Europe. They're much slower, and
they're dead in the water.
I was going to say they're dead, right? Like they are in a real scary position. And then you add in crypto and the ability to, as you said, where are you going to put your money if you're deploying capital? You're going to put it in U.S. tech. Well, you'd be crazy to put it anywhere else.
And now U.S. crypto. I mean, I think we've got Coinbase, which is the only real large public crypto blockchain Web3 digital asset, whatever you want to call it, company, and I've been saying there's no chance that I've been saying before the election, within the next 5 years, that there won't be, many, many more public crypto blockchain businesses. And now I think they're going to make it a priority in this administration. So we have, of our 23 companies, we have 12 that are American. I think, I know Sachs is talking today. I'm not sure what he's going to say, but I think there's going to be a real effort to get some of these bigger companies that we own that are making hundreds of millions in revenue, to get them public, to give the public the ability to have exposure. Because look, as you mentioned at the beginning of the show, when I first started or had the idea for the fund in the middle of 19, the entire digital asset ecosystem was worth 300 billion. That was the value of Bitcoin, all the altcoins, and then all the equity in the space. And I said, well, I think within 10 years, we can hit 10T, which is 10 trillion. But no one will believe me that was my view, that we could 30X in 10 years. So I said, I'm going to put that view into the name of my fund. Now, here we are 4 years later. The fund launched in January 21, the first one. And here we are, and we're at 5T today. So we're 5 trillion. That's the value of Bitcoin, all the alts and the equity. And I just put out on Twitter, like 10T is an anachronism. The whole space looks nothing like what it did in, the middle of 19 or 20. And I'm thinking over the next 10 years, we can hit 50T. 50T would put Bitcoin at 1 million, right? 10X roughly. I think you said 30X, but it would put Bitcoin at around 1 million. And I've not made this call before. And people on Twitter were like, Dan, that's a bull market for ants in crypto, 10X in 10 years. I'm not very good on maybe on a 1 year, 2 year, you never know what can happen. 10 years, 20T to Bitcoin, I think another 10T for the alts and the venture projects. I think, look, ETH and Solana are core assets, but everything else is still sort of venture. And then I think we're going to have a massive market for the companies that grow up on and around, the digital asset ecosystem, whether you call it Web 2.5 to 3, or whether we call it Web 4.0, which is kind of the AI agentic blockchain world I don't even know what that's going to look like. But if I start to add those numbers up, I think 50T is very reasonable. So our next fund, our Fund 5, which we're launching now, I think that's just the appropriate name for it. There you go. It's just, one roundtable partners will raise that fund. And I just think I'm not even being so hyperbolic there. It just like feels the same to me as it did in mid-19. That's a realistic target, right?
Has there ever been a time in your career where you have felt that there is such a obvious future for a new tech like crypto?
No, I mean, there's never ever been anything like this. I think, if you want to compare for value and money, I always say that the internet was the digitization of ideas and information, and blockchain, Bitcoin, crypto, that is the digitization of value and money. So what's changed for me in recently, and certainly for this next fund that we're going to invest, is that the on-chain economy has gone vertical in the last 6 months. And it's not just meme coins, and it's not just, everyone is like, people who aren't in the space, they're like, oh, well, what's the use case? Well, people who don't even own Bitcoin, they're like, oh, well, there's no use case. I'm like, well, the revenues that are accumulating now in DeFi, in the decentralized financial world, the number of mobile wallets, they're up like hundreds of percent from a year ago. That's the thing, is I've never seen anything go so viral so quickly. I don't think there's ever been a revolution in money and value like this. I mean, if you want to go back to like caveman times, right? You talk about trading beads, and then you talk about the introduction, maybe of metals, and then you've got silver, and then you got gold in Roman times, and then you had gold all the way throughout the Middle Ages, etc. Then you had big gold finds in America, out west in the 1850s, all that. But nothing that has been a complete, it's like, it's not just a change. It's like an entire universe is growing up independently on its own outside of the existing macroeconomy, right? It's not another financial product like bonds or stocks or commodities or metals. This is something completely different. Programmable money. Imagine like smart contracts, blockchains with embedded smart contracts. Like, that's an insane concept. If you talk to anyone in their 60s or any of the people who actually manage giant pools of capital, I mean, I would say probably fewer than 1% even know what that means of those people. So I think it's still very early in this. The ETF has probably brought some traditional fund managers into crypto, I would say. But I don't really think they yet sort of understand the power of the decentralized financial world and the power of blockchain and the network and the decentralized ledger and all of those, unbelievable.
And the tough thing is when you have a tech like this early, it has such broad use, so many use cases, so much product market fit that doesn't even exist yet, that we don't even know about yet, that it makes it very difficult to wrap your head around. What is the area that you are most excited about right now, short term?
Well,
Is it
look,
DeFi?
as an old-time macro guy, one of the things that, I think could catch on more than it has, but that I was always looking for was this takeoff in RWAs, real world asset tokenization. And the whole traditional world just cries out, the value that exists in the analog world cries out for a single, platform, a decentralized platform where all things of value can be traded with each other. And I think the illiquidity that exists in real estate, that exists in, okay, just think about anything that you own in the world out there that's not fungible, that's illiquid, that's difficult to move. Someone has got to figure this out. We have a great investment in Figure. Mike Cagney, who's founder of SoFi, he is, making some strides in this space. Securitize is another company doing something a little different. Ondo is another company doing something a little different in that space. But it's still like the first batter of the first inning. If I were like in the TradFi space and stuck at some bank somewhere, I don't know, it would be so painful. But if you're under 30 or 35, you're stuck at a bank, I would figure out how to transition into working into that area. I just think that if you're a traditional person, it makes so much sense. And I wonder if the government is going to start incentivizing businesses to, not that they need to. I believe in, private markets taking care of business. But look how much of a hindrance the government was in the last, 4 to 6 years. It just 6 months ago, many of my companies were getting sued by the SEC. And 6 months from now, there'd probably a bunch of them that are going to be public. Just think about how crazy that changes. Mm-hmm. So there might be like not a Marshall Plan. There might be I don't want to call it a crypto Marshall Plan. That's not exactly right. But I think the current administration is getting great advice from its advisory board on blockchain crypto. And I think they really understand its value and the potentially even, I don't want to get into this today, but like geopolitical value of being the dominant player on the blockchain, whatever you think that means. And so maybe there are incentives even. We've got incentives across the economy. We've got a $5 trillion sovereign wealth fund now. Why can't you put a few percentage points of that into, companies that are in this space? It'd be very easy to do that, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, it's clearly the future. I've never seen anything this big. I think you said it perfectly when you said that it has such wide application that we can't even fathom across the economy all the different ways that it's going to change the future. And it's tremendously exciting. So not only is it exciting to see this government at work, but to be in the most exciting area, mm-hmm. in my view. Mm-hmm.
And for everybody listening to this, who is a lot of are just retail, right? To have access to this before a lot of the institutions got here, incredible. And before it's we've never seen that.
The institutions are very slow. I have 4 or 5 institutional investors in my fund that are large, pension funds, but for the most part, 99% of them, or 98% of them are just
not here yet.
No. But you know what? If the U.S. sovereign wealth fund decides it wants to put 2% into the space broadly, not just Bitcoin, 2% of 5 trillion. You can do the math. It's 100 billion. That's probably something. Coinbase is only worth 70 billion today.
Yeah,
you could probably.
Coinbase is only worth 70 billion right now. What's your prediction?
I think it's. My old friend Raoul Pal at the GMI report came out recently and said Coinbase is going to go to 1,200 this year. So it's 300 now, 1,200. So that's a 4x. So I guess he's thinking 280 billion this year. I think that's a bit much. I think it probably can hit 150. I think long term, why there's no reason it can't be a $500 billion plus company. But then I think you got great other companies. You've got Kraken, you've got Circle. eToro has announced that they're going to go public. You got Figure, which I mentioned. Then you've got other companies like Figment and QuickNote, and there are a lot of Gemini, a lot of great companies, Ledger, Animoca. I don't know why all those guys aren't public eventually.
For
Those are
sure.
real businesses making real revenue. And if I were the head of the NASDAQ, I'd want all them on the NASDAQ, and then you create your NASDAQ crypto blockchain equivalent, right?
Yep.
And you have an index. I mean, if I were in the catbird seat managing that sovereign wealth fund, it just makes sense to me, right?
Does it? One thing that it stands out to me right now is
I
that
am talking my book, of course, but that's the only book that I can talk. Like, if I weren't talking my book, I mean, if I believe in it, I'm invested in it, right?
yeah.
I
Well,
can't.
you're long and loud, as you
I'm
should be.
long and loud, and if I'm wrong, I take full responsibility, and if I'm right, I take full responsibility, and
Yeah.
that's just the way it's been my whole life. And so, you know, uh,
I wonder if
anyway, so I just caveat that. Go ahead. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. You know what's funny? It's just thinking about you bringing up Raoul Pal is I wonder if Raoul's going to be he's going to be the bull always. Like he's always got the big
He's
predictions.
been right.
And he's been right lots, especially with exponential tech. He really gets
Solana, Sui,
yeah,
ETH,
totally.
Bitcoin. I mean, come on. He's been
And
fantastic.
but it's interesting for me to think about. And you're also not shy to be a bull, but you tend to be a little bit more conservative. I wonder if the
Because
strategy
I'm
might be just
managing a portfolio and I've got lots of risk on. I'm sitting with 1.5 billion of
right.
exposure, and I'm not a newsletter writer. I'm not a salesman. I'm a portfolio manager,
Right.
and I have fiduciary responsibility for the investments, and I report to my LPs. And I'm not a pie in the sky guy. We spend months and months doing diligence and research, and then I make an investment. And we as a team, we really do a lot of homework. And thankfully, we passed on, hundreds of deals in the past few years. We passed on FTX 3 times. We passed on Celsius.
You passed on FTX 3 times.
Yeah, because
Wow.
it didn't make sense on a lot of from when you really did the dig. I'm sorry, the deep dive.
Which you did.
Yeah,
and the
of
others
course
didn't.
we did. There are things that stood out that just any person. And they were really simple things. I don't want to talk about it now because it's 2-3 years ago. Who cares? It's finished, and now we're in a great period. But when you have a guy come to you who's 30 years old, and he says his company's worth 30 billion, and it's 50 times revenues multiple, and there's only one person on their board, one, okay, and that person is his dad. You're thinking, you know what? Maybe this is a past, right?
Yeah.
Forget about all the other things that we uncovered in our diligence. That alone was enough to push us off. So, anyway, you got to do a lot of work in this space because there are a lot of, fraudulent, not a lot. There are fraudulent actors. It is a little Wild Westy. And I think these companies that we own that are marquee names, that are making a lot of money, bringing them public and getting that validation is going to do a lot to clean up some of the, nefarious actors in the space.
Because FTX was several years ago, but the impact of that is still
being felt,
right? And especially, and you would get this better than anyone. I said off the top that you're the only fund in the world that is exclusively focused on crypto in growth stage investing. There were more growth funds that were doing it pre-FTX, but they all left, right?
Yeah, and there were traditional growth guys. Maybe they'll come back. You do have the VCs who end up doing their pro rata, and they'll do their, in the later rounds, like Andreessen will move and Katie Hahn will move into growth, but they do tons and tons of venture. We don't really do venture. That's not really our focus. Unfortunately, FTX, he really crushed a lot of the traditional growth investors who were beginning to, dip their toe into the space. 50 billion, $100 billion growth investors, tech investors, who now, then who swore it off. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, literally in the last 18 months, there really has only been maybe one or two growth deals. I mean, Phantom recently just had a growth round, but I think in the next 18 months, we're going to see quite a few more. And that's why, it's time really for us to raise our next fund, which is actually going to be very different from our previous 4 funds. But I'm hoping that, we'll have some growth deals again to invest in. I do suspect we do in the coming year. So
yeah, I want to shift gears slightly here, Dan. I want to go to your thoughts on the majors and how you think about the majors. And I got to start with ETH because you put out a tweet just the other day. When did you put this out? Jan 31st. You put this out. You said too much hate for ETH on X. Break of 4,200 will double to 8K this year. What's your thought on Ethereum right now?
So look, I think it's at a high price now, and it's the kind of thing where, look, it's a core asset in the space. It's developed, it's already achieved network effect. I think Bitcoin and ETH are different from all the other cryptocurrencies. Solana is now probably, should be included in that bucket. It probably will be by the end of the year, but, it's had 10 years of track record. People forget this thing was trading at like $100 for years, 200, 300, 2,000, 3,000. These are very high prices. And okay, maybe some people say, especially on X, they've gotten lazy. The layer 2s have sort of carved off a chunk of their revenue possibilities. ETH has huge mind share, huge number of developers developing on ETH. If you're not EVM compatible, you're kind of like dead in the water. And it's also a little more grown up. I mean, Solana, I think, because they've attracted so much activity through the meme coins, kind of keeps some of the more traditional people away. The ETH ETF is going to be the next thing that, the massive number of people who bought Bitcoin ETFs, they're going to buy ETH ETFs. And I think the investors in the US who are familiar with technology, I think they're more drawn to the programmability, the ease of programmability on ETH. And so I think tech investors in the US as well sort of see ETH as a more productive Bitcoin, which, look, it's neither here nor there. I'm not really a technology investor per se like that. I just see it as a core asset. And maybe they've been lagging behind. Maybe the narrative, they're narrative thumpers, the people out there thumping for ETH they're disappointed because they've underperformed. But this is all short-term trading action stuff. It's like, so my guess is what happens with ETH is it sits there and consolidates between, 2,600 and 3,500, and it just goes sideways. And every single person gets frustrated and bored and this and that. And then we wake up one day, on a day like the day after Thanksgiving, and it's up 40% for some reason, or the US Sovereign Wealth Fund decides it's going to put a little bit into ETH. I mean, you have to, in a way, like, I don't want to say ignore the noise on Twitter because some of the noise is interesting, but the reality is you have a lot of really young, inexperienced people managing money, investing and trading in this space. And markets all behave the same way. Markets are markets, whether it's gold or the S&P or NASDAQ or Bitcoin or whatever. And they have a certain emotional patterns. And it just feels, and after trading for years and years and years, markets end up feeling a certain way. And I can just feel people's pain in ETH, even though it's doing fine. Like that wick yesterday that it wiped out below 2,000 and now it's back at 2,800. It was just so painful. You could see people were probably, and that's the kind of pain markets are built to exert on people. And so it's going to gnash around, I think that's the word, and it's going to create uncertainty, and people are going to give up, and then we're going to wake up one day and there'll be some little tweak that happens, or somebody will say something, or there'll be some little innovation, or something new will be introduced, or maybe Vitalik, gets involved and, tweaks something, or consensus, or whatever. I have no idea. But what I know is also that, markets always try to disappoint the greatest and exact the greatest amount of pain on the greatest number of people. And that is how markets work.
Yeah.
And essentially, thankfully for me, having suffered many losses over my career over many years, and thankfully having come back as well, we've structured a portfolio for ourselves that is able to withstand some of the vagaries, some of the bear markets, and some of the price action that can really be diabolical. This is by far the hardest market to trade that I've ever seen or ever been involved. I mean, you can't, and that's part of the reason why we don't really trade into companies that have cash flow, that are not going to go under, and that aren't going to go down 90% over 3 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly feels. I mean, as you said, everyone gives up at the worst time in markets. That is the way it goes. That's how markets work, and it certainly feels that way for ETH right now. That the sentiment is so bad and so down that it actually kind of makes me bullish right now. It makes me feel like
this way, the better.
Yeah.
It's hard to deal with it. You're sitting long, but the longer it goes on sideways for months and months, and it needs to also not rally when you think it should rally. So we should get a bunch of good news, and the market won't, and the market should not rally. Then you get people really like screaming, oh my goodness, ETH got a great piece of news and it still didn't move. And then people really give up, and then it doubles.
Yeah.
That's just markets. It's not even ETH or anything special. Bitcoin does the same thing.
Well, we bring up Bitcoin. Before we let you go, Dan, I know we got to wrap up here. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin and Sol, the other two majors for this year?
I mean, I've been thinking Bitcoin is going to go up to 150 to 180 for the last 18 months or so, and it's just, I think it 3x from 2021 peak. The 2021 peak was at 20K, and I'm sorry, the 2017 peak was 20K. You then had a big bear market, and then you went up 3x from the previous peak. So then you hit around 60. This time, the peak in 21 was around 60, or call it 70, whatever. I'm calling it 60. And then you should 3x again from that previous peak, which I think is about 180. So I've been on record saying I think 180 is a good number. Again, I mentioned Raul just because I saw him a few days ago. He sees 350. There are a lot of guys out there more positive. I think Novo at Galaxy has a bigger number. I think 180 is just fine. And, Solana probably can double from here too. But look, I think what's different about this cycle is that, again, I actually think we're going to see a lot of these larger companies going public. And again, I am speaking my own book, but that's something that hasn't happened, that with this new administration, being really, and a new SEC, I think they're really going to be making some effort to make this happen.
And what's the impact of that?
Well, I think it creates this idea that if you're want to start a business and in the space, that you have potentially an exit into the public markets, that you could, that the regulatory framework is positive. There are legitimate businesses. You see, I think it legitimizes the space. It helps adoption. And it does a lot to bring over traditional people into learning what this is about, because everyone owns stocks. I mean, that's why the ETF was great, because everyone has a stock account. And so overnight, if you actually wanted to, you could buy this Bitcoin ETF. But that has actually nothing to do. I mean, you really should be, have a digital wallet. You should be, interacting with DeFi. You should be doing a lot more than just having, that's great. You have financial exposure through the Bitcoin ETF, but you're not really engaging with the technology. And that's what's a phenomenal thing and a wonder. But people who buy the Bitcoin ETF, that's the first step. Then they learn, and then they buy some ETH, and then they try to figure out what ETH is. And then you're like, wait a second, this is programmable money? Like, what is that? Stable coins, RWAs, depend, all these ideas that are more venture really bring people into the space. I mean, stable coins, you have over $10 trillion that were settled last year on stable coins. 5 years ago, it was zero. So I think people want to engage and be involved in an area that's really growing like that. Mm-hmm. And there are many areas of the economy that are stagnating in the old world. And I think having businesses that are public just encourages people from the traditional world normies to actually dig in deeper.
Yeah. So, it's an exciting time. Exciting time.
Most exciting I can recall.
Yeah. Dan, appreciate you joining us today and giving us your time. Sure. Excited to watch the 50T launch and your next fund, and really appreciate your guidance today. Thanks again.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thanks for listening in, everybody. Have yourselves a wicked awesome day. We'll see you again tomorrow. As always, if you liked today's episode, please hit subscribe and make sure you follow us so you don't miss out on the next one. There's also a link in the description to our free 5-minute daily newsletter where we simplify crypto for you while making you laugh. And if you're willing to step up your crypto investing game, we're going to also leave a link for Milk Road Pro. You get access to our portfolio where you can see exactly what we are buying. This is your #1 resource to help you invest successfully in crypto. One final note, this show is for educational purposes only, and nothing we say is financial advice. Investing in crypto or any asset is risky, and you should never invest more than you can afford to lose. Thanks so much for listening in, my friends. Have a wicked awesome day.